The auditorium was full of noise, filled with the chatter of students and parents arriving for the school assembly. The air was thick with excitement and a little impatience. Everyone seemed to be in their own world, talking, laughing, and moving to find the best seats. In the middle of all this, a small, quiet girl sat in the back, trying to make herself invisible. She had always been shy and preferred to stay in the shadows. But today, she was being forced into a situation she had dreaded for weeks. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her heart pounding as the thought of what was coming made her stomach twist. She could hear the laughter of some students as they noticed her, and it made her shrink even more into her seat. The teacher in charge of the assembly, a tall woman with a strong presence, called out her name, and everyone turned to look. The girl froze, her mind racing with panic. She had always loved music, but performing in front of a crowd had always been her greatest fear. The thought of all those eyes on her, expecting her to play perfectly, made her want to disappear. But there was no way to escape now. She had been chosen, and the only option was to face the moment. She walked slowly toward the stage, each step feeling heavier than the last. The floor seemed to move beneath her feet, and she felt a wave of dizziness. She could hear the whispers and giggles of her classmates, some of them making jokes at her expense. Every comment, every look felt like it was magnified, echoing in her mind, adding to her fear. She kept her head down, focusing only on the floor in front of her, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. The audience's murmurs seemed to fade in her ears, replaced by the rapid beat of her own heart. She reached the piano at the center of the stage and hesitated, her fingers hovering above the keys. Unsure if she could really do this, the teacher gave her an encouraging nod, though there was a hint of impatience in her eyes. The girl swallowed hard, feeling the lump in her throat grow larger. She had practiced this piece countless times in her room, when no one was watching, when she could pour her heart into the music without fear. But now, with all those people staring at her, the notes seemed to dance away from her memory, teasing her with the possibility of failure. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but it seemed to make little difference. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, and she was afraid that once she pressed the first key, she would freeze completely. She looked up briefly, catching the gaze of a few students in the front row. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to amusement, and it made her feel even smaller. She had always been invisible in school, the quiet one who blended into the background. And now, she was being forced into the spotlight in the most terrifying way. She wanted to turn and run to hide somewhere safe, but she couldn't. Something inside her, a tiny spark of determination, told her that she had to try. She owed it to herself and to the music she loved so much. Her fingers finally touched the keys, hesitating just for a moment before she pressed down on the first note. The sound that came out was soft, fragile, and hesitant, like a whisper in the wind. She felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Relief that she had actually made a sound, terror at the realization that the audience had heard it. She could feel their eyes on her, watching her every move, and it made her chest tighten. But she kept going, pressing down on the keys, letting the notes flow as best as she could. Each sound seemed to build her confidence just a little, though her nerves were still very much present as she played. She became aware of the silence that was slowly settling over the room. The whispers and laughter had stopped, replaced by a quiet attentiveness. She couldn't see the faces clearly, but she could feel the attention and focus of the audience. The music she had loved in private was now reaching out to the people around her. She could sense that it was having an effect. It was a strange feeling, both frightening and exhilarating. She realized that the notes she played could speak in ways she never could, expressing emotions she had always struggled to put into words. The girl's mind began to clear, and she found herself more present in the moment. She wasn't thinking about the audience, the whispers, or the fear anymore. She was thinking only about the music, the story it wanted to tell, and the way her fingers moved across the keys. Each note became a thread connecting her to something bigger, something beautiful. She could feel her heart slowing, her breathing becoming steadier, as the music took over her fear and filled the space around her with emotion. She was no longer just a shy girl on a stage. She was a musician, a storyteller, and the piano was her voice. Time seemed to stretch as she played, each measure flowing into the next. She noticed small details she had never paid attention to before. The way her hands moved in harmony, the subtle shifts in rhythm, the rise and fall of the melody. The audience remained silent, captivated by the unexpected beauty of the performance. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others were simply listening in awe, but all were fully present. Drawn in by something they had not expected from the quiet girl they thought they knew. Her confidence continued to grow with each note, and she began to play with more expression and freedom. The fear that had gripped her at the beginning was still there, but it was now balanced by a sense of purpose and courage. She realized that this moment, terrifying as it was also a chance to share a piece of herself, to connect with people in a way she had never experienced before. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling of pride and empowerment she had never known. As she approached the middle of her piece, her playing became more fluid, more assured. The music seemed to take on a life of its own, guiding her fingers and shaping the emotions she wanted to convey. She could feel the audience's engagement, their collective breath held in anticipation, and it gave her strength. The sound of the piano filled the room, reaching every corner, and she could sense the impact it was having. The shy, timid girl in the back of the auditorium had become the center of attention, not because of her words or appearance, but because of the power of her music. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the full depth of the piece. The fear and anxiety melted away, replaced by a sense of connection and purpose. She understood in that instant that music was more than just notes on a page. It was a language of emotion, a way to touch hearts without speaking. She could communicate her feelings, her struggles, and her joys, all through the piano, and the audience was listening. As the final notes approached, she felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. She played with everything she had, pouring her heart into the music. And when the last note lingered in the air, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The room remained silent for a heartbeat, as if the audience needed a moment to absorb what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, the first clap sounded, followed by more, until the entire auditorium was filled with applause. The sound was overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. She had faced her fear, shared her gift, and touched the hearts of everyone present. The girl stood up, her hands still trembling, and took a small bow. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, filled with admiration and respect. The teacher who had pushed her onto the stage approached, smiling warmly, and gave her an approving nod. She realized that she had done something remarkable, something she had never imagined possible. In that moment, she felt a new sense of self, a newfound confidence that would stay with her long after the assembly was over. As she walked off the stage, the applause still echoing in her ears, she felt a mixture of relief and joy. She had faced one of her greatest fears and discovered something important about herself. She understood now that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She had found her voice through the piano, and she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey. The shy, quiet girl had stepped into the spotlight and emerged stronger, more confident, and more connected to the music she loved. She had learned that even in the face of fear, it was possible to create beauty, inspire others, and discover the power within herself. The applause still echoed in the auditorium as the girl remained at the piano, her fingers lightly resting on the keys, her body trembling with a mix of relief and disbelief. She could feel her heart still racing, but now the fear that had gripped her moments ago had been replaced with something new. Something powerful and unfamiliar was growing inside her confidence. The audience, which had been skeptical or even mocking just minutes ago, was now watching her with wide eyes, completely captivated by the music that had flowed from her so unexpectedly. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The room was silent again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the tense silence of fear or expectation. It was a quiet that held attention, that hung on her every move. She realized that she could feel their curiosity, their emotions, and their connection to the music. For the first time in her life, she understood that her playing could reach people, could touch them in a way words never could. This realization made her feel small and yet incredibly important at the same time. Her hands moved almost automatically, guided by the rhythm and melody that had been flowing through her since she first touched the piano. She had practiced countless times, but those sessions were always private, solitary moments in her room. Now, the music had a new dimension. It was alive, shaped by the presence of the people listening. She noticed subtle movements in the audience, a tear rolling down a cheek, a smile spreading across a face, the way some people leaned forward slightly, eager to hear more. Every reaction fueled her, making the music richer and more expressive as she continued to play. She began to remember the reasons she had fallen in love with the piano in the first place. It wasn't just the sound of the keys or the complexity of the pieces she practiced. It was the ability to express herself, to create something beautiful from her emotions. She had always been too shy to share that with anyone, too afraid of judgment or failure. But now, standing on that stage, she realized that her music didn't just belong to her, it belonged to anyone who was willing to listen. And the people in the room were listening. With each note, she felt more connected to the piano and to herself. The fear that had made her hesitant moments ago now seemed distant, almost imaginary. She felt a freedom she had never known, a release from the invisible chains that had kept her from expressing her true self. Her body relaxed, her breathing became steady, and her fingers danced across the keys with a fluidity that surprised even her. She was no longer simply playing. She was telling a story, painting a picture with sound, and every listener was a part of that creation. The melody shifted, growing softer and more delicate, and she felt the emotions within her swell. Memories of quiet evenings spent alone at the piano, of nights when music had been her only companion, of moments of loneliness and longing, all poured into her performance. She realized that every note she played carried a piece of her heart, her struggles, her dreams, and as she looked out at the audience, she could see that they were responding, that the emotions she poured into the music were reflected in their expressions. Some had tears glistening in their eyes, others seemed almost breathless, as if they were holding their emotions inside, afraid to let them out. She understood then that music had the power to create a shared experience, to bring strangers together through emotion and empathy. The girl's focus sharpened, and she became aware of the subtleties in her playing. She could hear the way the notes resonated in the auditorium, the way the vibrations carried through the floor and into the audience. She noticed the small shifts in tone, the rise and fall of the melody, the pauses that gave the music space to breathe. Each element became an opportunity to communicate, to emphasize the emotions she wanted to share. She was no longer just performing a piece. She was living it, becoming one with the music, and allowing it to flow through her in a way that felt natural and authentic. As the middle of the piece approached, the complexity of the music increased, demanding more precision, more control. Her hands moved faster, more confidently, and she felt a thrill of excitement mixed with the lingering traces of fear. It was a delicate balance, and she was acutely aware of every movement, every note, every pause. She could sense the audience leaning forward, their attention fully captured, their focus unwavering. The thought that she was responsible for holding that attention, for guiding the emotions of everyone in the room, was both terrifying and exhilarating. But she embraced it, letting the music take over, letting it guide her in a way she had never experienced before. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls fading away, leaving only the piano, the music, and the people who were listening. She felt as if she could reach out through the sound, touch their hearts, and share a piece of her soul. It was an intoxicating sensation, one that filled her with warmth and courage. She understood that this was why she played, why she had dedicated so much time and effort to her music. It was a language that transcended words, a way to connect with others on a deep, emotional level. As the piece progressed, she allowed herself to experiment with expression, to add subtle dynamics that reflected her emotions. She played with softness and strength, with tension and release, shaping the music to convey her story. She noticed the audience responding, their reactions guiding her choices, their silence encouraging her to explore even further. She felt a sense of control and artistry she had never known, and it exhilarated her. The shy, hesitant girl who had stepped onto the stage moments ago was no longer the same person. She had been transformed by the power of music, by the courage to share her gift despite fear. When she reached the final section, she felt a swell of emotion, a combination of triumph and gratitude. Every note she played carried her journey, her growth, and her newfound understanding of herself. She poured everything into those last few measures, knowing that this moment would stay with her forever. The music reached its climax, resonating throughout the auditorium, and then, as the final note lingered and faded, the room remained still. The silence was profound, a collective pause as the audience absorbed the beauty and power of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, the first clap sounded. It was hesitant at first, almost shy, as if the audience themselves were in awe of what they had experienced. But the applause grew, spreading through the room, building into a wave of sound that lifted the girl's spirits and filled her with a sense of accomplishment. People stood, some cheering, some whistling, all showing their appreciation and admiration. She bowed, her hands still lightly resting on the keys, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. She had done it. She had faced her deepest fear and emerged stronger, more confident, deeply connected to her music. As the applause continued, the girl felt tears prick her eyes, tears of relief, pride, and joy. She realized that she had discovered something essential about herself, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She had learned that her music had the power to reach others, to move them, and to create moments of shared emotion. She understood that this experience would change her forever, that it would shape her future performances and her life in ways she had never imagined. When she finally stepped away from the piano and walked off the stage, she felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The echoes of applause still rang in her ears, but they were accompanied by a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew that this was only the beginning of her journey, that there would be many more performances, many more moments of fear and courage, and many more opportunities to connect through music. She had taken the first step, and it had opened a door to a world she had only dreamed of. The shy girl who had once hidden in the shadows had begun to shine, and she knew that her story, her music, and her courage would continue to grow with each note she played. The applause slowly faded, leaving a calm stillness in the auditorium. The girl stood by the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her body vibrating with adrenaline and a newfound sense of purpose. She could feel her heart slowly settling, but there was a spark inside her, something bright and powerful that refused to be dimmed. She realized that this experience was not just about playing a song, it was about expressing herself, about sharing something deep and personal with the world, and about discovering strength she never knew she had. As she closed her eyes and touched the piano again, she thought about the way the music had carried her through the earlier moments. It had started as something small, tentative, almost fragile, but it had grown into something magnificent. She understood now that the music was not just about notes or rhythm, it was about connection, it's about emotion, and about storytelling. Each note had become a voice, a part of her speaking to the audience in a language that needed no words. She could sense their reactions even without seeing them clearly, the quiet gasps, the tears, the gentle nods of understanding. The music had reached them, and it had reached her in a way she could never have imagined. She began to play again, softly at first, letting her fingers find their way across the keys as if reacquainting themselves with a friend. The notes flowed gently, like a river winding through the auditorium, carrying emotion in every turn. She remembered why she had chosen this particular piece, why it had spoken to her so strongly during her practice sessions. It was a story of struggle and hope, of fear and courage, and now, in front of the audience, it had taken on a new life. The girl felt as if she were painting a picture with sound, each phrase and chord revealing a new layer of meaning. The music began to swell, growing in complexity and emotion. Her fingers moved with greater confidence, guided by instinct and feeling rather than strict memorization. She noticed the audience leaning forward, their focus intense, their attention fully captured. Some faces were filled with awe, others with tears, and a few were simply silent, unable to process the beauty they were witnessing. She felt a sense of responsibility, a gentle pressure, knowing that she had the power to guide their emotions, to create an experience they would not forget. But rather than fear it, she embraced it, letting the music take her and the audience on a shared journey. As the piece continued, she allowed herself to be completely absorbed in the music. She closed her eyes and felt the rhythm, the ebb and flow of each phrase. Her breathing became synchronized with the melody, and she felt as though she were part of something much larger than herself. The room seemed to disappear, leaving only her, the piano, and the invisible thread connecting her to everyone listening. She realized that the music was not just her own expression, it belonged to the audience now as well. Each person taking a piece of it with them, feeling it in their own way. She remembered the nights she had spent practicing alone, the countless hours where she had questioned her ability, doubted herself, and feared performing in front of anyone. Those moments of doubt now felt distant, almost unreal. She had grown so much, and she could feel the difference in herself. The shy, hesitant girl who had once trembled at the thought of performing had been replaced by someone who could embrace vulnerability, who could let her emotions flow freely and share them with the world. She had discovered a strength that came from within, a courage that had been waiting for the right moment to surface. Her hands moved with precision and grace, the notes cascading in a way that felt both deliberate and spontaneous. She played with dynamics, bringing certain passages to life with soft, delicate touches, and others with bold, commanding strokes. The music became a conversation between her and the audience, a dialogue without words. She could sense their emotions, their reactions, and it guided her playing, encouraging her to explore new depths, to take the music further than she had ever gone before. At one point, she noticed a few students who had been skeptical at the beginning, sitting with mouths slightly open, eyes wide with surprise. They had expected a timid, uncertain performance, but what they were witnessing was something entirely different. The girl realized that she was breaking through more than just her own fears. She was changing perceptions, challenging assumptions, and creating a moment that would be remembered by everyone present. The realization gave her a quiet confidence, sense of pride that was not boastful but deeply fulfilling. The middle section of the piece demanded more energy and emotion. The music swelled and contracted, carrying tension and release, guiding the audience through highs and lows. She felt her body respond, swaying slightly with the rhythm, moving in harmony with the notes. It was as if she were dancing with the music, not physically, but emotionally, allowing it to flow through her completely. Every challenge in the piece became an opportunity to express herself, to convey feelings that words could never capture. She felt liberated, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted. The audience remained utterly still, caught in the web of her performance. Some were biting their lips to hold back tears. Others had closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. And a few sat with open mouths, completely captivated. She could feel the energy in the room, a collective heartbeat that matched the rhythm of the piece. It was an extraordinary sensation, one that made her feel both humble and empowered. She understood that this was the true magic of music, not the skill required to play, but the ability to create a shared emotional experience, to touch lives in ways that transcended language or culture. As the piece approached its climax, she poured every ounce of emotion into her playing. Her fingers moved with increasing intensity, the notes striking with clarity and passion. She felt tears prick her eyes, but she welcomed them. Knowing they were a reflection of her connection to the music and the audience, the crescendo built, a wave of sound and feeling that filled the entire auditorium, leaving no one untouched. She could sense the audience holding their breath, waiting for the final resolution, for the release that would bring closure to the journey she had led them on. When the last note lingered in the air, it was as if time itself had paused. The audience sat in stunned silence, absorbing the beauty and power of what they had just experienced. The girl lowered her hands slowly, her fingers trembling from exertion and emotion. She opened her eyes and saw faces filled with awe, tears, and admiration. The applause started softly, hesitant at first, but quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. People stood, clapping, cheering, some whistling, all showing their appreciation and amazement. She bowed, overwhelmed, feeling a sense of accomplishment that was hard to describe. She had shared something profound, something true, and it had been received with love and respect as she stepped away from the piano. Her legs feeling weak, but her spirit soaring. She realized that something inside her had shifted permanently. She had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and discovered the power of her own voice through music. She understood that this was not just a performance, it was a turning point. A moment that would shape her confidence, her self-expression, and her relationship with the piano for the rest of her life. The shy girl who had once hidden in the shadows had begun to emerge, strong, courageous, and deeply connected to the music that had always been a part of her soul. She walked off the stage with a quiet smile, the applause still echoing around her, and felt a mixture of exhaustion, exhilaration, and joy. She had discovered that true courage comes not from the absence of fear, but from the willingness to act despite it. She had found her voice not just in the music, but within herself. And she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey filled with challenges, growth, and extraordinary moments. The audience had witnessed something special, and so had she. She had learned that music had the power to heal, to inspire, and to connect people in ways that nothing else could. And most importantly, she had learned that her own heart was capable of more than she had ever imagined. The applause faded slowly, leaving the girl standing near the piano, her body still trembling from the intensity of the performance. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but the tremor in her hands had lessened, replaced by a sense of calm accomplishment. She could still feel the lingering electricity in the air, presence that seemed to wrap around her and acknowledge the courage it had taken to perform. It was as if the room itself had recognized something rare and powerful, and in that recognition, she found a quiet pride that grew inside her with every passing second. She took a moment to glance at the audience, noticing the faces of those who had been skeptical moments ago. Now, they looked at her with awe and a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Some were leaning forward in their seats, as if they could not believe the music they had just heard had come from the shy, quiet girl they had once overlooked. A few had tears in their eyes, and others had a faint smile that carried respect rather than amusement. She realized that her performance had not only reached them, but had touched them deeply, perhaps in ways they hadn't even anticipated. The thought filled her with warmth and validation. The music had become a bridge, connecting hearts in a way words never could. She felt the piano beneath her fingers, its cool surface grounding her as she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Every late-night practice, every moment of doubt, every solitary effort to perfect her skill had led to this instant. It was no longer just about playing notes. It was about telling a story, sharing her emotions, and making an impact. She understood now that the true power of music was not only in technical mastery, but in vulnerability, in allowing herself to be seen and heard, and in trusting that the audience would embrace that honesty. Slowly, she let her hands drift over the keys, running her fingers lightly across them without pressing down. The sound was absent, yet the memory of each note lingered vividly in her mind. She thought about how different she had felt moments ago, paralyzed with fear, consumed by anxiety, and wishing she could disappear. Now, the fear seemed distant, almost foreign. What remained was an understanding that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. Every step she had taken on the stage had been a victory, a small triumph. Over the insecurities that had held her back for so long, her mind wandered back to the preparation that had led to this performance. She remembered the countless hours she had spent alone in her room, practicing quietly when no one was watching. There had been nights when her fingers hurt, when she made mistakes that seemed impossible to correct, when frustration and self-doubt threatened to overwhelm her. Yet she had persisted, driven by a love for the piano and a desire to express herself. Each moment of struggle had strengthened her resolve, building a foundation of skill and determination that now allowed her to stand before a crowd and share her talent confidently. As she reflected, she noticed subtle interactions among the audience members. A teacher approached a few students, pointing toward her and whispering something that brought smiles and nods of understanding. It was clear that her performance had shifted perceptions, not only among her classmates, but also among the adults who had watched skeptically at first. She felt a sense of responsibility for the impact she had made, understanding that her courage had the potential to inspire others, to show them that vulnerability could lead to extraordinary moments of beauty. The realization filled her with both humility and empowerment. She allowed her gaze to wander, observing the subtle details of the auditorium. The light streaming in from the windows created patterns on the floor, and she imagined how those patterns might reflect the flow of the music she had just played. Every corner of the room seemed infused with the energy of the performance. She could sense the lingering emotion that had been stirred in the hearts of the audience. It was an invisible tapestry of connection, woven from sound, attention, and shared experience. She marveled at the power of music to create such an intimate bond between performer and listener. Even in a space as large as this, the girl's thoughts returned to herself. To the transformation that had occurred within her during the performance, she realized that the experience had not only been about proving her ability, but also about discovering her identity. For years, she had seen herself as quiet and timid, a shadow in the background, unsure of how to assert her presence. But in the act of performing, she had found a voice that went beyond words, a voice that conveyed emotion and truth with every note. The piano had become an extension of herself, and through it, she had revealed a depth of courage and expression that she hadn't known existed. As the audience began to settle back into their seats, she felt the weight of the moment fully. People were still speaking in hushed tones, reflecting on what they had witnessed, and some were exchanging glances that spoke of shared amazement. She felt a strong sense of connection to each individual in the room, as if the music had created a bridge that allowed her to reach their hearts directly. She realized that she had become part of something larger than herself, a shared human experience that transcended fear, expectation, and self-doubt. In that quiet aftermath, she allowed herself a deep, conscious breath, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat slow. The adrenaline that had coursed through her veins was settling, leaving a sense of serene accomplishment. She thought about the lessons she had learned in the process, the importance of preparation, the necessity of facing fears, and the power of vulnerability. She understood that these lessons were not limited to music, but were applicable to many aspects of life. Each time she faced a challenge with courage and honesty, she could create something meaningful, something that could resonate with others in unexpected ways. Her thoughts turned to the reactions of her classmates. Some had been watching with quiet skepticism, but now many wore expressions of respect and awe. She knew that she had altered their perceptions, perhaps in ways that would linger long after the assembly ended. The shy girl who had once been overlooked had stepped into the light, and the audience had seen her for who she truly was, not just a student, but a person capable of inspiring emotion and admiration through her art. It was a revelation that filled her with quiet joy and a sense of validation. She had longed for it, but never expected to find so. Powerfully, the girl's hands drifted over the piano keys again, this time without playing, as if feeling the memory of the music and the smooth surface beneath her fingers. She thought about the journey ahead, about how this moment could shape her confidence, her performances, and her approach to life. She knew that she would face many challenges, moments of doubt and fears in the future, but she now understood that each one could be met with courage, creativity, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability. The piano had been her guide, her companion, and her teacher, showing her the transformative power of art and self-expression as she slowly stepped away from the piano and toward the exit of the stage. She noticed the lingering impact on the audience. Some people were still in hushed conversation, discussing the nuances of her performance, while others simply sat in quiet reflection. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her music had created an emotional ripple, touching each person in a unique and meaningful way. It was a feeling that transcended words, a confirmation that her effort, courage, and dedication had mattered. The girl understood that the experience had also changed her perspective on fear and expectation. For years, she had avoided opportunities that made her nervous, believing that her anxiety would always outweigh her capabilities. But the performance had shown her that fear could be transformed into energy, that anticipation could become a source of focus, and that moments of vulnerability could lead to profound connection. She realized that life was full of similar challenges, and the courage she had discovered on the stage could be applied to any situation where she needed to step forward despite uncertainty. As she left the stage and walked toward the back of the auditorium, she felt the gentle warmth of accomplishment radiating through her. Her steps were lighter, her posture taller, and her mind clearer. She had discovered not only the joy of performing, but also the power of resilience, the beauty of sharing oneself fully, and the importance of trusting in one's abilities. The shy girl who had once wished to hide had transformed into someone capable of inspiring, moving, and connecting with others through her music. It was a revelation that would remain with her for the rest of her life. She found a quiet corner backstage and sat for a moment, letting the reality of what had happened sink in. The performance had been more than an event. It had been a journey, a series of small victories, and a process of self-discovery. She thought about the people who had been in the audience, their faces, their reactions, their emotions, and she realized that she had created something lasting. The memory of their engagement, their awe, and their respect would stay with her, reinforcing her confidence and fueling her future performances. As she slowly stood and prepared to leave the auditorium, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She understood that her journey with music was far from over, that each performance would present new challenges and opportunities for growth. But she also knew that the courage, self-awareness, and connection she'd experienced tonight would guide her in the future. She had discovered a power within herself, a voice that could reach others and convey emotion in ways she had never imagined. The shy girl who had once feared the spotlight had found her strength, and she knew that her journey had only just begun. The girl stepped out of the auditorium, feeling the cool evening air on her face. She paused for a moment, looking up at the sky and reflecting on the transformation that had occurred within her. The performance had been a turning point, a moment of clarity and empowerment. She had faced fear, embraced vulnerability the days passed after the assembly. The girl found herself replaying the experience over and over in her mind. Every note, every glance from the audience, every ripple of emotion she had sensed became vivid memories that strengthened her resolve and her confidence. She began to notice subtle changes in how people interacted with her. Students who had once ignored or overlooked her now greeted her with warmth, curiosity, or even admiration. Teachers who had been skeptical about her abilities started to encourage her, offering opportunities she had previously been too shy to accept. These changes, though small at first, began to shift her perception of herself. She realized that the courage she had discovered on the stage had transformed not only her abilities, but also the way she was seen by the world around. Each practice session she returned to after that day felt different. The piano no longer seemed like a solitary friend, but a companion with which she could share every emotion freely. She approached each piece with a deeper understanding of its emotional resonance, exploring dynamics, tempo, and phrasing in ways that allowed her to tell a story through sound. Her technical skill had grown, of course, but more importantly, her expressive ability had expanded. She played with intention, allowing herself to experiment, to feel, and to communicate in ways that went far beyond the written notes. The music became her voice, and through it, she learned to speak more confidently, not only on stage, but in life as well. Opportunities began to arise naturally. Invitations to perform at school events, local concerts, and community gatherings started to come her way. At first, the thought of performing again in front of an audience made her heart race with anxiety. But the memory of the assembly, the way she had transformed fear into art, gave her courage. She understood that each performance was more than a test of skill. It was an opportunity to share her heart, to inspire others, and to continue learning about herself. Each new stage became a place of growth, each audience a partner in a shared journey of emotion and expression. She also began to notice the impact of her music on others. Friends and classmates would approach her after a performance, sharing how a particular passage had moved them, how it had reminded them of their own experiences, or how it had simply brought them peace. These moments, though small, carried profound meaning. She realized that the power of music was not limited to her own expression. It extended outward, touching lives, fostering empathy, and building connections. The shy girl who had once doubted her ability to be seen or heard understood the profound responsibility and privilege of sharing her gift. At home, the girl continued to immerse herself in practice, but with a new sense of purpose. Each evening, she would sit at the piano and allow her thoughts and feelings to flow freely into the music. She experimented with new compositions, exploring different styles and genres, discovering nuances she had never considered before. The process became both therapeutic and inspiring, a daily reminder of the courage she had found and the growth she was capable of achieving. She began to set goals for herself, not just in technical mastery, but in artistic expression. Challenging herself to reach new heights and embrace new challenges, her confidence began to extend beyond music. In class, she found herself participating more, sharing her thoughts and ideas with peers and teachers. She joined discussions, offered insights, and became an active contributor, something she had never imagined doing before. The stage had taught her a valuable lesson, that stepping into discomfort and vulnerability could yield transformative growth. She discovered that the courage she cultivated through music could be applied in all areas of her life, empowering her to take initiative, face challenges, and trust in her abilities. Community members who had attended her performances began to take notice as well. She was invited to play at local events, fundraisers, and cultural gatherings. Each performance brought a new wave of emotions, both in herself and in the audience. The girl observed how her music could uplift, comfort, or inspire, and she approached each opportunity with a sense of responsibility and gratitude. She realized that her journey was no longer solitary. It was connected to others through the emotion she conveyed, and that understanding gave her performances a depth and authenticity that resonated powerfully.